lower my voice so you can have nice sleep during the session. I will try not to interrupt you. My name is Ahmed AlSum. I am a web archiving engineer at Stanford University Library. My title today is Web Bilingualist. I think this is what I'm doing in this project right now, just to track what we have from the past. The web started 25 years ago with a proposal from Tim Berners-Lee at CERN. After that, we started, the idea started to flow around the world, and we started here at US. And from time to time, since 25 years, we have these titles, first in the web, but where are the pieces? Small, ugly, but first. And from time to time, we have this stuff. So I tried to find these pieces, and I found this. We have early web pages exhibit, but it's only some snapshot about the early pages from the first website. So I started to take this opportunity. I tried to search all around the world in every place for these pieces. Where are these? And finally, the service manager, Nicholas Taylor, told me these pieces are at Slack, just across the street in the area that you are living beside. So I found these pieces, but I thought I'm going to find just the early website, but I find this is not website. I just find a web pages, little bit old, and not as we expect right now as the modern web pages. So let's start to think what we got from Slack. If you look here in on this screen, we have set of Unix backup file sorted by year or organized by year, and in each folder we have a set of web pages and a lot of another file that's related to the Unix backup file, and we have also some context information. And we have some context information about what are the pages in this folder, what are the date, and some access rights. And we have here the username of the engineer who takes this snapshot. Fortunately enough, the username here is Winters, and we have the engineer John Winters who took this snapshot and backup files. How many years?
I started the web archive at Slack in 1997 when Jean Deacon came to me, and she was writing her paper, The Slack Archivist, and said, I keep hearing we're first in the first website outside of Europe, but I can't find the first web page. Can you help? I worked in computer services for a long time at Slack, and before that at Cornell. And before that, I studied history of science, actually, as chance would have it. So I put my mind to it, and I thought of the backup system in our operating system, primary operating system at the time of IBM Virtual Machine, VM. And we had a wonderful backup system at Slack that kept files forever, quarterly. And I went looking, and I found some very old pages. It took a while because they depended on user ID. And in the end, I found 5 of the very earliest web pages that were available in December of '91 for Tim Berners-Lee's first demo of the web to the world at the Hypertext Conference in Texas. And Jean liked what I found, and because of some local software called Install, we had a whole lot of context information about those web pages. And they were in 2 primary localized spaces, almost without exception. So I could retrieve them from backup tapes, whole sets of them with history about how they got installed and who owned them and blah, blah, blah. And Jean liked that. She said, but I want more context. I need more authentication, I think is the correct word. So I started writing all these other files and doing list files and so on and so forth. And pretty soon after that, we started shutting down VM, so I had to move them over to Unix, and our web moved primarily from VM over to Unix We also had, from early days, had a very strong VMS component, Deck VMS. And then we developed Windows, and I captured some of those. I started capturing things annually. In the VM area, I captured them annually because I'd been convinced by Henry Lowood earlier at Stanford that sampling was a good idea instead of trying to capture all the data. I was doing this on a total shoestring. And so then it turned out we had major installations. So I did capture some of the very earliest page sets twice a year. And one thing led to another, and I kept capturing data and annotating it and leaving a very clear audit trail, authentication trail as best I could for all these data. Everything is available on Unix, including some very early Next files, except the Windows stuff, which has not been processed. And I guess. Okay.
Thank you, John. And we follow that trail. Let me thank you. Okay, so we have authenticated copies. These are the first copy outside the US from the first website. Okay, what we did, where we are going, we need to take this data to replay it within the Stanford web archiving portal. It's a customized version of the OpenWayBack machine. Okay, let's see what is the challenge here. My reconstruction strategy based on 3 components for each web page. I need the page content, which has already been saved within this Unix file. I need the timestamp that has this page appeared in the past, and the URL that this page appeared in this timestamp on the past. Why I need these 3 components? Because I will take this page content, and this page content will go to the work file, and the timestamp and the URL will be used as with the CDX to index these data, so it will be replayable after that within the Wayback machine. Okay, let's start with the page content. We already have the page itself. So my challenge was how to combine or encapsulate these pages within work file. So in this case, in this step, I use the wget with work option. So I prepare a list of web pages, list of the pages that I need, and I start recrawl these web pages using wget. And the wget by default will generate my work file and generate also another CDX file. But the only problem with this CDX file, it has the local host, because this is what I used wget, and using my today's date. So these are the data that I need to fix after that. After that, I need to start to find the URI. And the URI was the real part of a challenge in this project. Because number one, there is no one-to-one mapping between the directory structure as we have right now and the URI. Also, even for the host name itself, the host name itself, it changes through the time. So we need to find these, to follow these trails and find what were the URI in the past for each of these pages. So for doing the URI discovery, I followed some different approach. Number one, I started with the n-link from the collection itself. So I got every collection and I start to look into these, the whole collection of the Slack first website, and start to find all the n-links. And from these n-links, I can expect what was the page URI in this time. Also, I start to find any trails on the search engine for any backlinks to these web pages from any places. So I try to use Google and Bing to find any data that has been indexed from the past, or anyone speak about any of these URI in the past. Also, the HTML source code itself for these pages, the developer on this time has a lot of time to write down a lot of comments, as you see here. They were generous enough to write all these comments on this time, and also they add some information about what was the URI for these web pages. Also, I'm using Internet Archive, especially for the backup file after 95. We start from backup from 92 until 98. So for the most recent backup files, I can use Internet Archive to verify my findings. Also the application. For many years, they start to, as an engineer at Slack, start to publish some information about what was the pages, how they did this stuff, and they wrote some URL during these pages. So I tried to find the URL within these publications. So I read the publication and found the URL on this time. Finally, when I just stop can't do anything, I went to John and Jean over there to ask them what they think about the URL for this web page. So reconstruction of the URL itself was a main challenge in this project, because as I said, the URL itself was not mapped one-on-one. Okay, let's explain more about this. For example, for the first set of URI, this is the file path that I have. 1993 Slack VM, blah, 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 blah. And this is the URL. So it was very difficult to map from this file path into this URL to find every space. And in this time, in this early age, it was just one depth. So the word find was the name of the system, I think, and or just this prefix for the URI, and just you have the default and other web pages. Also, for example, to limit access to Slack network, and this was one of the stuff, if you find Slack only in the directory structure or on the URL, you have this was not for the public. So this kind of pattern, we don't know about it in this modern web technology. So this was some challenge to find in the past. Timestamp, and for the timestamp, it was not difficult to find what was the timestamp for this content, because for the wonderful job that John Winter did, and they find for each web page, for each file they add the last modified date, and I trust this last modified date based on her explanation. This was the last modified date for this page, and this is Unix last modified date. So for each page, I can find the page name and find the timestamp that has been created. Of course, this is just on the day level, not on the date and minutes level. So based on this information, I took all these dates and wrap it into update the CDX file that has been generated from the wget in the beginning. So for each of the CDX file, for each page, I changed the URL was localhost something with the URL that I reached, and I changed the timestamp with the timestamp that I reached. And after that, we deliver both of the work file and CDX file to the Wayback machine. For the Wayback machine itself, it was some kind of problem with the access for accessing the data. First, we used customized version of OpenWayBack 2.0, and for some historical reasons, the start date was 1996. I think the people at Internet Archive believe that there is nothing before 1996. We shouldn't care about this. So I have to change this starting date, and I think in the OpenWayBack 2.1 it started to be configuration or something. So we changed this hard code to be 1991. Also, the early website has some capital letters, and it make the Wayback and the index itself a little bit confused how to deal with this stuff. Also, some obsolete files, and I can't manage this stuff. There is, for example, the first Slack logo was on XBM format, and it can't be rendered on the modern web browser right now. So this stuff we can do. So even the access problem has some stuff to tune around to make the web pages reliable, like in the past. For the quality assurance, after wrapping all this stuff and posting the OpenWayBack, I return it back to the Slack staff to verify this information, because I can't verify this was pages at the best. There is no trail to verify this stuff. So I returned to them, and they give us a lot of comments about it, and we tried to tune the collection to give the people the real experience about the best web. Okay, what is the result? We have data from 8 years. We discovered 52 pages in 1991. Mainly, the mainly was most of this data web pages, and some of them was executable file and data to bring from. Because in the early web pages, it was just an interface to another virus and another pin list system. So it was just dynamic web pages like what we say right now. Okay, I will show some example about what we get. If you look here, this is the Slack homepage. This is the December 1991 web page, just 4 pages, and this is the first web page that we have in the system. And after this is August 1992. They start to add more information. 1996, the images and the kind of modern web pages start to reach right now. This is what we have right now in the last year. So the web pages start to grow through the time. And when we say Slack home pages itself, the word homepage is not right, because when I asked June the first time what was the homepage at 1991, she told me we don't have something called homepage in this time. It was just 3 pages, I think the default and pin list and another page. So all this way they have was just entry page. In 1995, they start to make 3 home pages because they expected the people who are coming to the website may have different level of details that they want. So they have the welcome page, this is general information highlighted for something like indexing, and detailed page with more information about it. So even the information development in this time has different idea, and right now in 1998 they start to have this kind of the modern homepage as we think about it right now. Okay, this is just first under construction page. Someday there will be text here. Okay, so we wrap all these data under the swab.stanford.edu. This is our customized version of OpenWayBack. If you go to the website anytime, you will find this is some links under featured archive site. So you'll find some links and some pages that you can follow and work with these pages. And welcome with any time of questions. And I will hold the mic and answer the question at the same time.
Hi. I'm curious about the Stanford logo, which was in a format you said was no longer interpretable by modern browsers.
Yeah.
I didn't even get the name.
It is XPM.
XPM. How did you? So did you just leave it? What did you do about it?
I can't do anything.
You didn't do anything.
And this is funny because in the first reconstruction, I think it was in June or May or June or something.
Mm-hmm.
I find I can browse and it shows a web page. It was on Safari. I'm not sure about the version. After that, I update my system or my operating system or browser, something like that. The next version of Safari didn't support this version. So I saw this logo once, just once, and after that it disappeared from. And I couldn't find any modern browser to replace this logo. Yeah. So it will be just blank in the header.
So what date was that page which carried the logo? When was it created? Which year was it?
1994.
Yeah, we did a similar thing, but for our own website from April 1995. And the oldest format in our constructed website is a .au audio file, and we were lucky that it still plays in the modern browsers. It's still, yeah.
You're lucky we're not.
Very interesting project, Ahmed. This is the first time I've seen it.
Thank you.
So one of the things that we found in browsing the archive, and you talked about a little bit, was that different parts of the archive over time were not contiguously navigable, right? So to get from the early pages of the archive to the later pages, you had to know that at some point the URL changed. I'm curious how you think about, in providing access to the user, how do we surface that? How do we help them find these broken fragments of what we consider to be a single collection or a single website over time?
You can open Jira on that, and I will fix it next month. Okay. Nicholas Taylor is the service manager for the Stanford Web Archive. Okay. The problem that Nicholas related to the host name itself, it changes through the time. And in 1995, they start to deploy, I think, on the Unix system or something. So it was big deployment. And with this big deployment, the host name changed and the URI it changed. So if you are trying to browse the website vm.stanford.slack.stanford.edu, and sometime you will find this, we stop here. There is no more pages. We are moved to another URI. And because from web archiving perspective, I believe web archives should not change the history. We just provide it as it is and just annotate it. We couldn't do anything. So if you are browsing and next in your in the list of the URIs, in the list of the mementos, you will stop in a moment that you don't know where to go after that. And we can't change the file. I can't edit the web pages itself. So from my perspective, if we have the ability to annotate the pages, and this is, I think this is maybe a good research area, if we have annotation for the memento or my annotation for the web page. So if I have this information, I am as one of browsing the web pages, I know in this time this page it changed it to another place, or I need to annotate this page. So I suggest, or maybe a good area, if you have some kind of annotation, so I can go edit annotation and write some information. This information pop up to the other users who can browse the pages, so they can understand some of the experience or some of the information behind just the regular web page that we have. So I think the annotation would be a good idea. We can put it on the roadmap.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
Hi, Vinay from the Internet Archive. I was just going to add to that same point about, could you potentially add redirects into the CDX, but then you basically said, well, we don't want to change history, and we don't necessarily want to introduce, but annotation would be one way of saying, right from this point moving forward, just click on this URL and it'll go to the closest capture, and it's a completely new host. But to that end, you mentioned you modified the CDX file to update the timestamps. Did you do the same with the works?
And no, I couldn't change in the works because the work is generated from the wget immediately. And if I change it from the wget, it means I need to go to each work record and change the headers and all this stuff. And I'm lower my voice. Okay, I'm still working. I don't want to match the standard work format for any reason.
You do run the risk that if you lose the CDX, you have to do this again, right?
Yes.
We've always had this understanding that if you have the works, you can always reconstruct.
This is the point. So in this case, usually in our system, we just deposit the work file and the workflow go directly and generate the CDX and all this stuff. In this ingesting process, I override the system to add my customized CDX file. So this is the only drawback around, yeah.
Right, so one final thing. To that end, I would think that would particularly be like this one translation step that you have going from works to the CDX, where you can say, not only do I update the timestamps, I also apply my annotations and apply, this kind of like, let's make a link from any future timestamp to the old host, go to this new host. Okay. And that, has its specific annotation record.
Actually, my idea about annotation maybe go larger than that. I'm thinking about crowdsourcing of people who are browsing the web archives. They can add contribution to the information of the page itself. So I wish if we can do it one day, at least add more information for this banner, for the WayBack that we forced the people to look into it. We can add more information instead of the next add first and all this stuff.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
yeah, it's quite for me.
Sorry, my bad. That's very. Everybody's awake again. We'll continue on the archaeology track, and let me present you Federico Nanni. He's a PhD student of Society Science and Technology from the University of Bologna in Italy. Thank you.
Hey, hi everyone. It's great to be here. Can you listen me in over there? Yeah, perfect. So yeah, first of all, a few words on my background. I'm a historian. I studied contemporary history and digital humanities during my bachelor and master. And right now my main research interests are in the area of web historiography. So how can we study the web of the past, which are the most important challenges, how can we deal with them, and in computational history. So how can we use natural language processing techniques or text mining methods or information retrieval approaches to study historical sources, and how can we combine these two different things. And in particular, the aim of my project, I'm conducting a PhD at the Center for the History of University at the University of Bologna, and I want to offer a new perspective on the recent history of universities. Okay, and my team is working in particular on the history of the University of Bologna. I have a colleague who is working on how to study the diachronic relationship between the university and the private sector in our region. Another one is studying like the evolution of the interaction in the field of chemistry between our university and other universities around the world. And what I want to do is try to understand how can we use both digital sources and materials that are online as new sources to have new insight and a new perspective on the history of the University of Bologna. And when I'm talking about both digital documents, I'm thinking about materials that are offered on the website and at the website as itself, as a document, as a corpus of sources that we can use and understand how the university presented itself online during the years in order to attract new students, as an example. And also all the sources that are being offered on the Alma Digital Library. As an example, we digitized all the PhD theses published since 2007 and all the master and bachelor theses published after 2009. So it's a great corpus. We can understand, as an example, trends in the publication, so what we are studying in different fields of studies, the interdisciplinary collaboration, things like that. And however, working with these kind of materials is complicated, as you of course know. So they are really difficult to preserve in their integrity, and they are too many to be studied without computational approaches, as Ian said like half an hour ago. And so in my research, I'm working with these two different issues in order to combine different methods to deal with them. And in particular, I will talk here today about the first one, but in my research, and my PhD, I'm dealing with both of them. And studying the past of the University of Bologna is particularly complicated, especially because, first of all, the website has been completely redesigned between 2002 and 2006. So all the materials that were available before that are not available anymore. So they've been completely removed from the live web. In particular, for what concerns the pages of the department, they were really active during the second part of the 90s, and they've been completely removed. Some of them changed the URL and then being recreated under another URL. So it's kind of a problem here. And Italy still doesn't have a national web archive, so researchers that are interested in studying the Italian web sphere have to use the Internet Archive or other international platform to preserve the web. But the University of Bologna has been excluded from the OpenWayBack machine. And it's a big problem, for me at least. And this was the message that you have found on the OpenWayBack machine until a couple of weeks ago, because we were finally able to solve that, as I will explain in a couple of slides. But as you can imagine, if you want to study the past of the University of Bologna and you don't have a snapshot in the Internet Archive, and you don't have a national web archive, then what can you do? Well, the solution that I found were two. The first one is you can try to collect other sources in order to understand how the platform evolved during the time. Okay, as Niels Brugger already suggested, as an example, you can find information in newspaper archives, so articles about the website. So how was the website during time, which things were offered on the website during time. And also we worked with the Internet Archive in order to understand these issues and in order to solve that. And I will describe that in the second part of the talk. Yeah. So my first step was understanding who supervised the website during the years, and so to discover which were the team. And I discovered that 4 different teams supervised the platform and managed the platform during the years. I worked with Cesia, which has been supervised the platform until since 2011. And they suggested me to contact Luca Garlaschelli, who was the lead of this redesign of the website. And he supervised the whole platform for more or less 10 years. And he also suggested me to contact Salvatore Mirabella, who was a technician that supervised the platform during the 90s. But actually, during the 90s, he just managed the main website, and all the department pages were managed by researchers and professors, okay? So they evolved completely differently. They offer different materials, and there are really interesting artifacts to see how different departments at my university approached the web. And I also had a call a couple of days ago with Renzo Davoli. He was the supervisor of the old TCP IP at the university between 1987 and 1994. And he also retrieved an email between him and Ozal Babaoglu, in which they said, it's an email from July 1993. He discovered that in an old backup of his computer, and that's great. But and in this email, he said that he registered the web domain of the Unibo website, and also he opened the website, and he managed that for 6 months, more or less. But no one of them has backup of the platform, so they were not preserved by them. And I had, for the first 2-3 months, just 7 PNG images, in which I was able to see how the layout of the website changed year after year. And I also found a snapshot of the website in the Internet Memory Foundation collections. That's because Italy conducted web crawl, an experimental web crawl of the Italian web sphere in 2006, and the university was preserved once in July or in June, I think. Well, anyway, the snapshot is terrible. It's all messed up and really confused, so it's not really an useful source. And also, I went to Denmark in June, last year in June, to work with the Net Archive and with Niels Brugger, and we discovered that Unibo was preserved in Net Archive, obviously not on purpose, but a few times between 2006 and 2012. And that was great for me, because for the first time I was able to scroll the page and see how it was structured, okay? Studying the exclusion issue, I discovered that, okay, the Unibo website was excluded, but not all the subdomains. Okay, as an example, the English version of the website was english.unibo.it, and it was preserved for 10 years. On the Internet Archive, it was available on the Wayback Machine, so I was able to see that and to browse that a bit. But after 2014, they decided to change the URL. It became unibo.it/English, and then it was blocked after that. So, but that was good anyway. And also in 2007, during a student protest in Bologna, the protesters decided to clone the website and to recreate the entire website under another URL, unibologna.eu. They just changed a few information, putting some things related to the protest. But this website was archived, crawled by the Internet Archive, and it was available. It is still available in the Wayback Machine. So for the first time, I was able to see the complete version of the website. So thanks, protesters. This was a really great move. So I also worked with sources from newspaper archives. I retrieved some information on the website in the Repubblica.it digital archive, which is one of the most important newspapers in Italy. And they had information on that since 1986. there are articles about, I don't know, on the website you can find this thing and this other thing. You can now pay fees on the website or things like that, okay? Well, not really useful, but you can understand how the website evolved under a different perspective, okay? And also in the local newspaper, Il Resto del Carlino. And then I found news related to the website in university digital magazines. Some of them are still available in the live web, others have been preserved and available in the Wayback Machine because they are subdomains. And yeah, I collected some information in student forums and in Usenet discussion groups. And there are discussions between students, such as, where can I find this thing? And you have to click here and there, it's a bit, and just scroll the page and you will find that, things like that, okay? But I was able to see, to have a perspective on how the website was organized. And also, before talking with Renzo Davoli, I tried to understand when the website was created. So I used 2 different lists of web servers, and I found information in the Italian one, which is Cilea, information related to the website in 1997, and also in the NCSA What's New. And there are some information related to the website in 1994 edition. So they are divided by month. I think it was in June 1994. Anyway, I summarized everything here. I think it's not really clear. Well, anyway, in red you can see who supervised the website year after year. In blue you can find the snapshot or the other sources, which are more like direct sources. And in green you have the coverage offered by the newspaper and the digital magazines. And in yellow on the top there are just some historical information, such as I was sure because I found a proceeding of a conference in 1993, and they said that the website was already online in December 1993. So before talking with Renzo Davoli, I was sure that the website was created somewhere between the end of 1992 and 1993. And well, anyway, all the results, the methodological results and the historical one will be presented in a paper that has been accepted for a special issue of Digital Humanities Quarterly and will be published soon. It's under peer review right now. And so, I also worked on the exclusion issue. I started studying the frequently asked question related to the Internet Archive to understand this exclusion, and I discovered that a website could be excluded if it changes the robot.txt file, as we know, or if the website owner sends a specific removal request. And this is really important, the website owner, okay? So I asked who supervised the website during the years, and they said that they are not aware of that. They didn't remember that. So you have 2 different messages, as you can see. The first one is related to the University of Trento in Italy. They blocked the crawler of the Internet Archive for 4 years between 2006 and 2010. And the second one is the Bologna one. And it's important to remember that if you block the Internet Archive crawl, the website will not be preserved by the Internet Archive because the Internet Archive respects the robot.txt policy. But if you send a specific removal request, well, let's discover that. I contacted, thanks to Raffaele Messuti from the University of Bologna, we contacted Giovanni Damiola at the Internet Archive, and we discovered that a specific removal request was sent to the Internet Archive, but it was sent in 2002. And it's really strange because, as you can see here, there is a request for the Unibo main website and for some strange subdomains. We don't know what they are, and they are still all blocked on the Wayback Machine. The only thing that is available right now is the Unibo main website. I will have a talk tomorrow with Chris Butler at the Internet Archive to discover something more related to that, because we were able to unblock the website just 2 weeks ago. And as you can see, the website has been preserved during the years. So someone sent a specific removal request, but maybe he explicitly said that he wanted the website removed from the Wayback Machine, but he wanted that the website was preserved in the Internet Archive, because it's something strange around it. Anyway, my next steps will be first of all, to understand something related to this request, and in particular, who sent this removal request, because it has to be the website owner or someone important in the university. And if the removal request is related somehow with the Portale d'Ateneo project, so the whole reorganization of the website, because it happened in that very same year, it started in 2002. So maybe there is a correlation between these two things. The second one is to remarking how the website could become a relevant source for the history of academic institution. And I want to conduct a comparatory study between a traditional source, so the yearbook, and the materials that you have on the website to see the similarities and the difference between the two. I want to work more with Renzo Davoli because I want to understand his role in the arrival of the internet and the World Wide Web in Bologna, both in the city and at the university. He was working at the Department of Mathematics because we didn't have a Department of Computer Science at that time. And well, I'd like to work on a more general purpose, and it's about the preservation of the Italian web sphere, because without a national web archive, these things are really complicated. And well, that's it. If you have some suggestions or advices.
Thank you.
Hey.
Questions?
There is a question over there about.
Yes, but I lost my second.
Well, oops.
Sorry.
Hi, Pamela from University of North Texas. This is more of a comment than a question, but seeing your efforts at trying to reconstruct what became of this website and why it was blocked, it makes me wonder whether websites today or in the past had, if the robots.txt policies really reflect the policy of the institution. You know, and like, why would they want to block that website from being archived? And what happens when the institution changes leadership? Or if just, you know, another web programmer comes in and they realize that they have been blocking the website, or maybe they never realized it at all. So, you know, just that.
No, this is a great observation. I was thinking the same thing because this morning I was reading on the Internet Archive website, and they said that the data related to these removal requests will not be published. But yeah, if I don't know, yeah, if the website owner changed during times, what happened then? So, and in particular, yeah, someone sent this request or someone decided to exclude the website, changing the robot.txt file. So it's maybe there are something that we have to think about related to this whole thing and this whole policy of exclusion or inclusion in web archives. And yeah, that's great.
Everything seems to be clear then. Thank you very much. Can I call upon our next speaker, please?
Is there a clicker? All right, I'm Michael Nelson, and this is work with Scott Ainsworth, one of my PhD students, and Herbert Van de Sompel. And borrowing from Kathy, this is our official title, but I'm much like he went to an archived web page, and you won't believe what he saw next. That I'm gonna use clickbait titles for all of my work from now on. So yeah, thanks for that. I'm gonna borrow that. All right, so I'm gonna first start with motivating the problem. Why should we care about temporal coherence? First, I need to acknowledge lots of other work that's gone on. So Ben Saad and Mark Samuel, they've written some really nice papers that if you're going to crawl a web archive, here's how you can do it to minimize problems in temporal coherence. All right, so that's well and good, but the problem is it'll never be 2012 or 2011 or 1991 again, right? So for the existing web archives that we have, how can we assess the coherence that we have in our existing archives? So in that aspect, this is really a continuation of a number of questions that our group has been asking. So first we started with how much of the web is archived. And we actually got a wide-ranging set of numbers depending on where your sample source is from. And then Justin Brunel looked at the issue of, are the archives themselves stable? The short answer is no. So the time maps, they expand and contract all the time. The URIs of the mementos, the archived web pages, they change all the time. So basically history is a very fluid thing. So perhaps Ian's already familiar with this, but for a computer scientist, it was a little bit shocking, right? You think you've taken a picture and you've nailed it down, but it changes all the time. Then Scott did a really nice work about 2 years ago where it looked at if I did a browsing session within an archive and I chose, I really like this time, just a few clicks, you've drifted really far away from your original target value just because of the sparseness of the archive and some of the other mechanics involved. Then Justin Brunel had a really nice paper last year where we looked at when you pull back a web page from an archive and it's missing resources, are those missing resources important? And because not everything is equally important. Little spacer GIFs, it doesn't matter if those are there, but if a YouTube video is missing its embedded flash video, right, okay, it's only one resource that's missing, but it tended to be an important one, right? But if the resources are completely missing in an archive, it's hard to know in advance whether or not they're important. All right, so the continuation of this is the question that Scott's asking is, so Justin was looking at the things that were missing, were they important? Scott's looking at the question of the things that are present, are they correct, right? And what you find next will surprise you. All right, so let's motivate this. So this is a snapshot of Weather Underground for some place in Nowhereville, Iowa, right? And it's December 9th, 2004. And we look at it and that's well, and actually the memento URI for that no longer works. So that justifies Justin's work involved, right? So we look at this, we see December 9th, 2004. We see one of the banners is missing. Well, that's probably an advertisement, who cares? We look at some of the happy clouds. They're captured 9 hours after the root page was captured. And then we look at the Weather Underground logo, that's captured 15 hours prior to this page. Okay, so we have a spread of hours. All right, that's fine. But the interesting thing is when we zoom in, we see on this particular day in Iowa that it's cloudy with a chance of rain, but the image that we store is from 9 months in the future, and if you notice, that radar image shows a very clear sky, right? So when we're evaluating this page, we've actually reconstructed something that never really existed, and we can semantically look at it and say there's no way that this clear radar screen goes with the chance of rain that we're expecting, right? So this is a temporal violation. This page never existed. All right, so this allows us to ask these questions of how often does this occur? If we query multiple archives and we try to reconstruct this page with the best mementos from many different archives, can we do a better job? And when we're selecting the mementos to choose, can we use different heuristics to figure out which one we should be using? All right, so some terminology. We define the composite memento to be the root level web page, right? So we're going to talk about root pages or composite mementos. That's the top level page that we grab. And then there's all kinds of embedded images and JavaScript and CSS, and sometimes you can have additional HTML, right? Where if you have frames or iframes or something like that, your embedded resources are additional pages. You can sort of represent it as a, well, I guess technically it's a graph, but you can sort of view it as a tree and talk about the embedded resources within the root or composite memento. Okay, so we developed this framework to discuss these pages, and it has 4 conditions. The first condition, the one that we want, is prima facie coherent, right? So looking at this root page and its embedded resources, and we can assert that this page existed, assuming the archive's not lying to us, right? We're going to put all that. But the page we're looking at existed at the time that it claims that it existed. That's a true page. The bad condition is prima facie violative. We can prove that this page never existed. That's like the Weather Underground example. Then there are areas of uncertainty. We refer to those as possibly coherent. So this page probably existed at the way, but we can't really prove it, and probably violative, right? So we don't really suspect that this embedded resource went with the root memento, but there's not enough data to really prove that it's a violation, but we deeply suspect it. All right, so let's consider the simplest possible page that we can. So we have a single HTML page, and it embeds an image, right? And it just wouldn't be one of my presentations if I didn't inflict raw HTTP on you. I love, love, love HTTP. All right, so what's happening here, this is edited response from the Wayback Machine at the Internet Archive. Two pieces, well, lots of good data, right? They're all beautiful headers. But two pieces that we want to use, the memento date time, that's the date time that the resource was captured. And then what's really cool is the Wayback Machine will replay the original headers at the time of capture. And those are prefaced with the x-archive orig. And one of the values here is x-archive orig last modified. So, and we realize sometimes last modified is wrong and so forth. We're going to put those questions aside. You can actually generally detect when last modified is wrong or incorrect. We want to use those two pieces of data to help us understand better about the archive. All right, so this is our first condition, right? So the root level page is the black diamond in the middle, and it's at T0. That's the capture of the root page. We could have one or more mementos, one to the left in the past and one to the right in the future. And the timestamps represent the memento date time, right? So the one on the right was captured after the root page, but if we look at the last modified date, it goes to the left of the root page. So we refer to this as bracketing, right? So the two pieces of metadata about the resource bracket the root page, and assuming no Byzantine errors, right, we can say that this page really did exist in the way that it claims during replay. All right. Also, we can have prima facie coherent with essentially simultaneous capture. And you can sort of tune your bubble of simultaneousness, right? 2 seconds, 2 minutes, something like that. So you would get this on the save page now, like, submit and grab everything that's in it right now, and you effectively get simultaneous capture. That's okay. All right, the problems are prima facie violative when we have the root page. We have the closest memento on the right-hand side, but it has a last modified date that is to the right of the memento. So this page was changed before it was captured. And if you recombine this in a replay, then you're lying. You're lying to your users, right? This page did not exist at the time that you claim. All right, possibly coherent. We don't really have enough information to tell. In this case, we have a root page. We have a memento on the left-hand side. We're showing it with last modified date, but both values are to the left. All right, did this resource appear in this page? Maybe, right? We're going to say probably it's okay, all right? And then probably violative. What we're showing here is the closest mementos on the right-hand side, but it doesn't have a last modified. So here's the thing. Most dynamically created pages don't have last modified as a metadata. So the absence of that is probably indicative of something that's dynamic. If you're dynamic, you're changing. So we're saying probably violative here. Now, again, you can have sort of an expandable window of whether you tolerate 2 minutes or 2 years within your collection on this. All right, so now let's walk through some actual data. So here's our Old Dominion University webpage. And we look at some of the embedded resources, and we see a mix of days, months, and there's even something down at the bottom that's 2 years later, right? So there's tons of images in this page, and basically if we listed them all, we can summarize it with, of 26 embedded resources, we get a mean value of 125 days spread, a much larger standard deviation. The minimum value is 9 days, right? There's nothing closer to the crawl date than 9 days. And it could go as many as 2.1 years. And that's actually looking at the time map values and using those as true values, which would account for possible duplicates in the system as well. All right. So how do we visualize this? Now, here's one way that we're playing with. We actually think it's a really crappy way to visualize it, and we're looking for input on this. What we're doing here is the y-axis shows the memento date time, the capture time of the root page. And those are the black diamonds lined up at 0. And basically on either value of 0, we have to the left we have the past, and to the right we have the future. So the green diamonds are good. Those are the ones we can do the bracket across the root memento and say, okay, this really did exist. And then we look at the ones that are probably coherent. They changed in the past, but we don't have enough data on the right-hand side of that. And then we look at the probably violative, the ones that are to the right, but don't have the last modified, so we're not sure if they're changing or not. And then we add the red. The red's obviously bad, of the ones we can prove. All right, so that's very simple. Then if we expand this to a time map from, in this case, 2001 to 2013 for the departmental page, and basically that dotted green line, that would be a single memento for the 2005, and then we look at the spread within that horizontal axis, gives you for one root memento, and then you expand it through time, and you get a feel for the entire time map. You see these diagonal lines, those are essentially a single embedded resource that's been crawled once, and as we go down in time, it's sliding to the left and going further and further into the past, right? And so media.gif, you look at the scale, that's, according to this, 2005, that was only captured in 2011, right? So there's a 6-year spread in that particular reconstruction. All right, so that was for a single page. We ran this again for 4,000 sample URIs using a data set that we already have. We ran it for using a single archive and using multiple archives, and we reconstructed using the 2 heuristics, the minimum closest distance, that's the default behavior, and the bracketing when we're able to do that. So we grabbed all the time maps, downloaded all the root mementos, downloaded all the embedded mementos. All right, within that, for the root mementos, we sample once per month, right, because we have a ton of mementos at that point. Then we extract take the HTML, extract the original URIs from that HTML, then do queries into the archives for those time maps of all the images and so forth, and then apply the heuristics for both mechanisms for finding the best momentum, and repeat until you're done, right? So of the 4,000 URIs, just over 2/3 of them are archived, right? And almost 1/3 of them exist in multiple archives. That's actually really encouraging. Now, the sample that we're using from, created in 2011, and this is a little bit like Schrodinger's web archive, right? By publishing the URLs, we've actually increased their archival rate. But, so put that aside for the moment. So mean archives per URI, again, we have a spread across multiple archives, and the time maps are on average about 124 mementos per root URI. All right, so all the reasons why we can't download the things that do exist in the archive, most of the things we can, and some of them are essentially replayed failures of live web failures at crawl time, 404s and other things. All right, for the embedded URIs, this grows up quite quickly, right? So we have 1.6 million embedded URIs, have roughly 20 embedded URIs per page. We can get about 15 of those embedded URIs on average per page as well. So why would the embedded URIs fail? So a lot of them are just simply not archived, and the others are replays of live web failures at the time of capture. All right, so this is the eye chart. And what we're doing here is you'll see that we have columns for minimum distance single archive, minimum distance multiple archives, checking across all the archives, and then using the bracket heuristic across a single archive and multiple archive as well. And so we'll look and see that basically 3/4 of the web pages are complete, and it goes up to about 80% when you include multiple archives. Some other notable things here. This is your tweetable moment here. At least 5% of the pages that you play have provable temporal violations, right? These are, and so when I first reported this, I said, you know, web pages are being used in courts of law as evidence. And then someone pointed out, well, only 5%, that's great. That's much better than the regular source of error for what passes. And then we just recently had the FBI created the whole genre of hair analysis, right? So I guess as web archivists, we should feel pretty good that we're doing better than the fake forensics of hair analysis. So I'm the only one that read that article about the FBI. Okay, all right. All right. Everyone's looking at me like it's my fault. I didn't make it up, okay? All right, so 5%, at least 5% of the web pages are temporal violations. The cool thing here is when we include multiple archives, our completeness goes up. Now, I mean, it's encouraging, but it kind of expected, right? But it's cool. The trade-off is we possibly lose coherence or provable coherence when we start pulling in all of these resources from other archives. Part of that is because the other archives typically won't replay the original headers. They'll just give you today's headers and yesterday's contents instead of yesterday's headers. So if you're running an archive and you're not replaying those headers, you're contributing to possible violations. Replay the original headers. It would help us out a lot. Okay, of the embedded URIs, the previous thing was for the root URIs. If we look at the embedded URIs, takeaway message here is at least 7% of the embedded URIs are used violatively. Now that's not a property of the URI itself, it's the URI in the context of the including page, right? So I could be a violation in one page and not a violation in another page, right? But at least 7% are used violatively. All right, so how can we make this better? So what we've done here is we can prove that this image and this page never appeared together. What we haven't answered is, does this difference matter, okay? Right, so we watch TV and there was recently a commercial saying that Domino's Pizza is now just Domino's, right? And so they changed the logo and, you know, does this matter, right? I didn't realize that it was actually called Domino's Pizza prior to that. I just assumed it was Domino's. So this change happens, and I guess if you're studying corporate logos, maybe it matters. But for most people, maybe it doesn't matter. It's a temporal violation, but who cares, right? Similarly, when Apple Computer changed from Apple Computer to Apple, again, who cares, right? It doesn't matter. So to actually study this, it's actually going to be tough, right? So we can look for binary equivalents for images. The preliminary result on that is that almost never happens, right? It's very rare, less than 1% of the time. So then if we need to discover, are these logos kind of the same? Well, in this case, they have the same color palettes. One's kind of a subset of the other. I don't know how this would score on any kind of automated analysis. And it actually might be depending on use. If you're using this in court of law, maybe this matters, but if you just want to order a pizza, who cares, right? If the embedded resources are HTML pages, it gets really, really tough, right? Because most archives will transform the HTML, and only the Internet Archive really supports this mechanism to play back the original content. So it's really hard to see, are these pages really sort of the same given all the transformations that web archives do? All right. How do we convey this level of coherence? So Herbert showed this interface on the time travel site using Ilya Kramer's really cool spread. I hope you've all played with that. And that's cool. We're showing temporal spread. We're using colors to color code the contributions from the archives. That's cool. You want to see where all the resources are coming from. How do we overlay something as ugly as that on top of what already exists? I have no idea. Right, so I'm hopefully just going to hand this off to Ilya. He'll figure it out and he'll come back in a week or something like that. No pressure, but he'll come back in a week and tell us how he did it. Also, how do we handle scale on this, right? So for some of the, dozens of URLs, that's embedded resources, that's not a problem, right? Once we go to hundreds or thousands, how do we convey the violations and where they exist? I have no idea. This is a huge, and I can tell you, Scott and I aren't going to figure it out, right? It's absolutely not going to happen. So anyone's interested in future research projects, really of trying to convey in a way that normal people will understand the temporal coherence of the page. All right, so one of the things, we can convey the page status, but what if I actually want to interact and get a different version of the page, right? So most of the time, maybe I just want fast browsing. Just give me the closest thing. I don't care about the Domino's logo. It doesn't matter. Just give it to me, right? Maybe I want to maximize the coherence, right? And so we have to apply this bracketing technology to find the best value. And maybe I want to aim for completeness, you know, querying all the archives. The reconstruction service, it obviously runs slower than just grabbing the page from the stovepipe of an archive. But, you know, we have to provide the capability in a meaningful way for users to choose on this list what they want to accomplish. All right, so in conclusion, we've defined 4 classes of temporal coherence. It's prima facie coherent and violative, and possibly coherent and probably a violative. We sort if the page and its embedded resources are in these classes by looking at 2 pieces of HTTP metadata, essentially the memento date time and the last modified, and the bonus areas when they bracket the root resources, then we really know that things are good. At least 5% of the pages that you play back from the Wayback Machine have temporal violation. We don't know if they're meaningful temporal violations, but they are definitely violations. If we use multiple archives, we can improve the completeness, because really 3/4 is not that good a number, but it comes at a cost of provable coherence, right? And the open issues of trying to determine the semantic impact of these violations and how to communicate the state to the user and the options that the user has, we really have no idea on how to go forward on that. All right, and that's it. Thank you. Well, I'm ready to go drink beer, so. Yeah.
First,
yeah.
I see there are lots of questions. I see
you. Okay. Hi, Michael. Quick question, just to get it clear in my own head. How's the root page defined? What's the root page?
It's the page that you query the interface in. You know, the Stanford default.html. Okay. That's the root page, and then all the embedded resources that are inside of it.
So following on from that, would you consider? You know, sometimes when URL rewrite goes wrong, when you visit web archive, you have live leakage that some URLs actually point to the live side. Would you consider that as a form of temporary violation as well?
So it is. It's not included in this study.
No. Okay.
So basically, he's not using anything that essentially executes the JavaScript. It's actually just using wget to get the resources and then looking at the links. So if you actually render this in a browser, you get all kinds of temporal violations.
Yeah, and some people actually prefer to see a page pointing to the live side than, you know, a hole on the screen. So this is back to the question,
really
does it matter?
Example of this that Justin had that was it was a CNN page in like October, November 2008, and it talked about, and then it was about the election of Obama versus McCain. The live web advertisement, because he rendered it in November of or October of 2012, it showed an upcoming debate between Obama and Romney. Right, so we had a page about Obama and McCain and an advertisement for Obama and Romney. Of course, that was golden, right? So we took a screenshot because, you know, you'll never get that combination again, right? And this was clearly a temporal violation. There's no way this 2008 page could predict that. But that was live web leaking into the web resource and would not be covered in the numbers that I reported here.
So in locks, one of the problems we have when one box repairs a file from another is we get temporal dissonance, inconsistency. In our case, we find it's often in a CSS or a script file or something, and in many cases it can be wrong, but it's good enough. It's a script library, or the CSS is good enough, and in other cases it isn't, and you can render and you can sometimes tell or not. And I'm just curious whether this is something you're looking at, another place you're looking at for evidence of coherence, and then I've just wondered if you'd considered that you have a moonlighting career as an expert witness.
Well, so I'm completely, I'll answer the last question first. I am for sale. I have no conscience. If anyone wants me to testify about a page, I'll fake a web archive, because there's no way you can prove me wrong. And really, I want to make more money, so it's all good. So contact me afterwards. All right, the first part of the question. So basically, especially for CSS, doesn't matter. So we haven't looked at that in this context, but what we've done in Justin's work when the CSS is missing, and I think we can reuse this. So if a CSS file is missing when you render a page, and you're not allowing it to grab it from the live web, so it's truly missing. What we do at that point is, so we can automate it. We look at the background color of the page and we divide it into thirds, and essentially we're looking for the placement of the content. And basically, if everything aligns to the left side of the page and goes down, you either have an ugly page, which can happen, or that CSS was important. And if it spreads out across the thirds of the page, and you get a nice distribution, not necessarily even, but you get 40, 30, I don't know, I can't do that math, but you get a nearly even distribution, then that CSS wasn't important. You could do that here when you had a violation. If it still renders okay according to sort of modern aesthetics, then it's probably a fine page. Now, for logos, so I've got a ping of a certain size and a ping of another size, and the last modifieds indicate their violation. Again, does that Domino's example, is that an important modification or not? It really sort of depends on the context. And there's only so far that we can push that. Maybe we can highlight them and say, these were your choices. Which one would you like? We chose this one by default, but you have this other one and they're different. So we could do all that, but man, talk about the world's ugliest, most confusing web page, right? Now you had to go through and click yes or something. I mean, for research for a particular page, you do it. For just regular browsing, you never want that, right?
Hi, Michael. Vinay from the archive. So great talk. And at the archive, I've been looking internally as well with our wide crawls to figure out this very thing about temporal coherence. In many cases, it's because of crawl policies.
Right.
And
Or
you've discovered an embed, you
right.
put it at the back of the line while you're crawling a host. And by the time you get around to it, it's been weeks.
Right.
And it's great that you have numbers like 9 days is the minimum. So to add to the point that Helen was talking about earlier today too about presentation and the breakup from the different archives, I was thinking, how about just a simple slider that shows the time drift that's allowed, and the default minimum could be 9 days from your study that says, look, you're not going to get anything unless you allow for at least 9 days drift. But then allow the user to basically expand that out, and you see the breakup of how the page changes as well as where this content's coming from. And this is a way that the user is also informed of the fact that this is how the page is being stitched, while at the same time you're giving them control as to how much cohesiveness they're willing to lose.
I agree, and that's a really good idea. And initially we were focused on spread, and because we had this intuition that this very large spread is bad, but then we kind of obvious, in retrospect, then we started looking at the last modified and said, well, this has got a 5-year spread, but it hasn't changed for 10 years. So even though it's spread, I think you could do that with the spread, but where last modified was available, you'd actually have to collapse those numbers, and you'd get a more accurate portrayal of. Now, oftentimes it's not there, and so then it is whatever it is, right? And you could say, well, this is 6 months in the future and 3 years in the past, and caveat emptor or something like that. But where you have the bracketing capability, you probably should reduce that spread to 0 and eliminating cases where the web server lied, right? And say, all right, this, it's a spread, but it's fine. Don't worry about it.
All right. I just want to point to something which probably, which is probably not very known. I'm looking at the case handled by the European Patent Office, 16th of January 2007, where archived web pages by the Internet Archive was submitted as evidence. And I'm quoting, all the things we're saying here is, I'm looking at a PDF document, I'm going to tweet, and saying, what we're looking at is not necessarily the thing which existed. It could be reassembled later. It could link to different things. So this, just to make a point that for archived website to act or serve as that sort of document, I think knowing about this, your work, would help us to move that direction.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So a lot of what I present has been anecdotally known for a long time, right? One of the things that we're doing is trying to provide some quantification, right? Because sort of intuitively everyone's known, well, based on the patched together donated crawls, the mechanics of the crawl, we sort of, it's been a wives' tale. So yeah, I completely, and Brewster's actually very careful to say that the page is not, I forget the exact way, he has a really eloquent way of saying, well, it's not literal truth, but he doesn't use the word truthiness, but it's sort of that, right? It's true in essence or something like that, but not really, so. Thank you. A question from Nicholas. So I am somebody. I was afraid I was going to get ignored from.
Have you and Scott explored using non-HTTP information as heuristics for determining when a page was published or updated? So examples might be some content management systems embed that information in the URL, or it could be in the footer, or it could be a case where when a resource is changed, then it changes URLs.
So you would probably get that for, certainly embedded in the HTML for the root resource. It would be harder for embedded resources if they're binary or something. We haven't looked at extracting it from the URI itself, because you're right. It might have 2012/10/9 or something like that. That would be a really good source of information. Yes.
Hi, Brenda from University of North Texas. I was wondering, and this is more of also a question not just to you, but to everyone, how do you think this will affect the larger context of web archiving? This is kind of following up to what Helen was saying, that if if I'm a person in a court of law that I see evidence, possibly a web archive being used as evidence, but then someone tells me this might not be reliable, what does that say for us web archivists? Because it obviously, I think it seems to reflect badly on us when I see that large spread of numbers of resources being pulled wherever which way in time. It doesn't seem like we're archiving things reliably, like we're not creating an accurate record of the past. And, the idea of good enough, could be quite very context variable. How do you think this will affect that issue?
Well, I'll take this is a question for everybody. I'll take a quick shot and then allow other people to comment. So I think an area of work is moving to trustable, auditable archives, right? So in the past, there was only the Internet Archive, right? And so whatever you got, you got what you got, and you were just happy to have it, right? And so for the longest time, really up until the last couple of years, when we saw an archived web page, all we did was, hooray, it's archived. And now the next part is to move beyond that and say, is this an accurate portrayal? Is that, can we construct a better version if we source from the, 15 or 20 archives that we can get through Memento, right? And you really do get better value when you can query everybody, especially when the time maps themselves are unstable. But anyway, looking to the future, I think this is the next step in research, is talking about this is archive, sort of what LOX does for scholarly communication, right? But can we generalize it to the broader web, right? Scholarly communication is a much smaller subset of random Facebook post, but these things turn out to be important, like with the Malaysian downing last summer, right? That was some random social media thing that nobody knew in advance was important. And then all of a sudden we're making decisions about it, whether or not it represents what the person really said. And we say it did, but the embedded video and so forth actually wasn't archived, and so we don't really have a complete view of the truth. But I'll let other people. Yeah, Nicholas ought to have a go.
So I think you're right to highlight the sort of positives and negatives of how this highlights the contingencies of our archives. I think in the US context, reading a lot of the literature about the authentication of Internet Archive Wayback Machine in legal proceedings, that a lot of those rely very much just on an affidavit from Internet Archive saying that, you know, that this content was archived in such and such a way. And it's just like a couple paragraphs of text, but that has mostly been sufficient to authenticate that evidence, which is to say that I don't think there's a deep appreciation in the legal community of the contingencies of web archives. And I think as we move into a place where web archives are a more commonly used type of evidence in legal proceedings, and we start having expert witnesses in web archives, that actually being able to point to scientific methods is a key part of being able to make the case that that's a discipline that needs that expertise in a legal context.
And
so
we can always say, hey, we're not hair forensics, right? We're not that
right.
bad.
There's always that. So on balance, I would say that I think that this work is really important for continuing to popularize web archives in that context and thereby help to mainstream web archives more generally.
That's also a great way of closing the afternoon. Thank you very much, Michael. This also concludes the last session of today. It's also the conclusion of the open part of the IIPC GA. Thanks everybody for attending these last 2 days. We've heard and learned so much together. Thank you for everybody for who the conference now closes, and I hope you make your way back.